Blog Talk Radio.
And in those days, there were giants in the land, and the sons of the angels of God looked upon the daughters of men and found them fair, and took of them wives, and their sons became of old great men of renown. So they have been mixing with us on a genetic level since the time of Enoch and Ezekiel's will.
Everyone earth will retreat by the sun, moon, and stars, and imagine there's got to be planets like ours. So conceive of a face on the surface of Mars, so in need of a meaning and purpose we lost. That indeed they believe that these might be our gods, or that maybe with time we'll do right and evolve and eventually reach what they seek and then solve all the problems of man. But they really don't know that they fall in the works of our hands are but just filthy rags. So we travel the lands to dig up our past time elapses, and with it are much of the facts. Some imagine that God came in alien craft. They react in this way, they're so desperate for meaning and purpose, but satanic service, they know that they have evil motives. Am I making you nervous? I'm just scratching the surface. The signs from Ezekiel's wheel, when the skies unfold like scrolls and the breaking of seals. Heed the warning, the message is clear, heed the warning. The time draws near, see the signs from Ezekiel's wheel, when the skies unfold like scrolls and the breaking of seals. Heed the warning, the message is clear, heed the warning. The time draws near. In the blink of an eye, all believers will be raptured. Anyone left receives a mark or the caption. This leader will arise, claim his origins are alien, possessed by Satan on the side of the Nephilim. Profess those who left held us back from evolving, and now that they're gone, we'll solve all of Earth's problems. The worship of any one God will be halted. Evolving to gods and ourselves be exalted. They'll play on these lines, and in time they'll devise and arrive at a plan that will help hypnotize all the ones left behind, the spiritually blind. He's stolen their souls, now he's stealing their minds. It's already started, we're seeing the signs. Just study the word, prophecies all aligned. They'll chop off the heads of all those who fight at one earth, one world. Aren't you excited? The signs from Ezekiel's wheel, when the skies unfold like scrolls and the breaking of seals. Heed the warning, the message is clear, heed the warning. The time draws near, see the signs from Ezekiel's wheel, when the skies unfold like scrolls and the breaking of seals. Heed the warning, the message is clear, heed the warning. The time draws near. Where will you be in the year 2012? Are they casting a spell they're not ready to tell? It's time to reveal what they tried to keep veiled. Pure evil they hail and they sell it so well. He fell from the heavenly realms where he dwelled, a once beautiful angel that tried to rebel. Expelled from the light into darkness and hell, now a serpent and snake with reptilian scale. He wears a disguise with angelic wings and mimics the truth with a lie so obscene. He always repeats the same thing he told Eve, that you'll be supreme, a king or a queen, that you can evolve to an enlightened being, a god of your own that can do anything. He feeds on our souls with this fraudulent scheme in so many ways, but it's all just the same. See the signs from Ezekiel's wheel, when the skies unfold like scrolls and the breaking of seals. Heed the warning, the message is clear, heed the warning. The time draws near, see the signs from Ezekiel's wheel, when the skies unfold like scrolls and the breaking of seals. Heed the warning, the message is clear, heed the warning. The time draws near.
Why hide yourself with, creating UFO crafts and things like that? Why that deception if that's indeed what's going on?
The creatures figured out that there was one way that they could frighten mankind, and that is to present themselves as technologically superior beings from physical UFOs.
Why would they want to abduct human beings?
UFO abduction might not be caused by physical occupants, but from creatures living in perhaps what we would call another dimension.
Posing as occupants.
Yes, the same type of interfering, harassing, paraphysical creature in every culture worldwide.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is FallenAngels.tv, and we're 3 days into the new year. Happy New Year to everybody out there. I hope you find blessed and peaceful days as we move on to a whole nother, 2011. It just seems crazy that we've come this far and how close we are to the Mayan end date of December 21st, 2012, and how all that seems to have been hyped up, and especially of late with all the different movies and like the History Channel and all the shows that have been focused on that end date. And so, but anyways, we have a super guest with us today, and it's Doug Elwell. He's the publisher of Mysterious World, and he's got an incredible book out. MysteriousMysteriousWorld.com is an online journal dedicated to various topics like travel, history, and ancient mysteries. And Doug has this incredible book out. It's Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man, and the End of the Age. And so he's going to be discussing with us today his various research and how he came to the conclusion and how he came to put this book together. But I have, as always, a co-host with me today, Alan Swanson. Alan, you want to give a shout-out to the listening audience?
Yeah, good afternoon, Fallen Angels TV. Looking forward to this show and revelation that's going to be brought forth.
We've done a number of different shows just lately. We did the Destroyer Cometh, and then we read from the Colburn Bible, and it was all about Planet X, Nibiru, Wormwood, or the associations thereof. If they are indeed the same thing, who knows? But maybe Doug can give us some insight. Doug, do you want to give a shout-out to the listening audience?
How you doing? It's Doug Elwell from Mysterious World, and now Planet X, MysteriousWorld.com. planet-x.info, trying to talk about my new book, Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age, with folks over at Fallen Angels TV.
Well, our listening audience is pretty versed on these esoteric topics, and so we should be able to cover a lot of ground today. We set aside 2 hours to be able to delve wherever and we would like to follow and allow it to lead. Doug, I know you've been into various topics. One of the first times I ever found your website was when I was actually doing research on the giants and the Nephilim, and you have an incredible archive, pretty detailed, of the various accountings from all throughout the world and the different parts, even here in the United States. Can you talk a little bit about how it was that you came out to find out about the giants and what led your interest there?
My interest in the giants has been around for a long time. I've always, as a Christian, I've been a Christian since a young boy. I've always been attracted to the more unusual, mysterious aspects of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, where there's a lot of things I've found that have not been well translated. And a lot of the liberal scholarship has all but erased many of these mythological elements like the giants and the dragon and other things, which I have found to be key components of the history of Israel. The liberals in general, liberal scholars who don't feel that the Bible is the inspired Word of God, are trying to erase those things. I felt that in order to fight back against that tendency to demythologize and liberalize and ultimately take God out of the picture altogether, was to emphasize the giants and the dragon and the other so-called mythological aspects of the Bible, and talk about them and the fallen angels and things like that, which are in academics are considered to be taboo subjects. But in my understanding, when I come from more of a conservative Bible church-type background, these things are taken seriously. And I've always felt in my spirit that they were true. So I wanted to do a series of articles that took the giant seriously and with the assumption that they could have actually existed. And so I went into the library. I went to Wheaton College Graduate School. And some years after I graduated, I decided to go back and start doing some more research so I keep my research skills in tune. So I did some research in Wheaton College Library and some other books by folks like Steve Quayle and others who have done an excellent job of doing research on giants. But I felt that even more could be done and take more of an academic approach to it and see, is there anything behind this? Is it really true? Were there actually giants in the earth in ancient times? So I wrote a series of articles based on a large amount of information I found, both in old articles, academic articles, books, various references, and commentaries, and found that there was indeed a strain of thought that believed that the giants did indeed exist, and they were the offspring of the fallen angels, so I wasn't the only person who still felt this, even though people like that were becoming more and more rare in academics. People online and the regular folks who go to church were interested in that sort of thing, and so I felt that I was serving God and them in that way by talking about the giants and the implications that their existence has upon our existence, upon mankind's existence, and who we are and why we're here, and some of the meaning of these more mysterious topics in the Old Testament.
Well, it certainly has profound implications, and it did for me. And you're right, it is one of those taboo subjects. Do you think that the people are afraid to go into it just because it's so hush-hush, or just because they think it's so fantastical that it can't be true?
Well, I think you're correct. I could elaborate. There's two major sources of fear. Fear of social stigma, which is the most powerful of all, but also the fear that if there is something there, then what does that mean? What does that mean about us? What are we really? Are there different kinds of people on Earth? Two different strains, as is basically openly stated in the Bible, that there was one line of Cain and another line of Seth. Of course, the line of Cain was wiped out by the flood, but it says, Moses said there were giants in the earth before the flood and afterwards. So the implications of that it also has to do with racism. I mean, not necessarily black versus white, but racism in the sense that there might be actually different races on the earth that have intermingled. And what implications does that have? I mean, the family of man, who knows what's going on with us? Are there, for example, even in your own family, two different strains of people, maybe some giant, maybe not. And that the implications that has could be tremendously destructive socially. So that's a major taboo subject as well. So there's the social aspect you mentioned, and also the racist aspect. What does this mean? If I talk about the giants, is that something the Nazis would talk about? That's also a social stigma. So you have to be very careful about this and treat it very delicately. I found that I managed to do that in my Giants articles. You can see those at mysteriousworld.com in the archives section. That's a series called Giants in the Earth. And those Giants articles, I thought I was concerned about that, but I found that they were so popular that the Giants articles, the four of them, in fact, I would say two of the four of them, the ones about the giants in the Americas and giants in the earth, the original one about the biblical giants, drew more traffic than every single other article on the site combined.
Wow.
So they've proven to be highly influential among other people. I guess you were also influenced by them. Others were, Tom Horn was as well. He's the publisher of my new book about Planet X. And others too. And in fact, when I was writing them, I felt that I was being led by the hand of God to open up some old secrets that have been long forgotten. And I learned a great deal about the giants myself in the process of writing. Part of the process, reason that my motivation for writing is I learn a great deal while I'm doing it. And I clarified some mistaken assumptions and learned new things I didn't know. For one of the examples of writing articles for Mysterious World was I was kind of on the fence about, for example, the Loch Ness Monster. I wrote a series of articles about mysterious sea serpents. And before that, I was kind of skeptical. I was skeptical and open-minded about it. But after writing the series, I realized, there's no way there could be Loch Ness Monster. It's just not possible. The biology is against it. So I actually changed my mind on that one after studying it in depth. I no longer believe in that sort of thing, nor do I believe in Bigfoot necessarily. Both of them would have to be some sort of supernatural thing. But giants, I became more convinced that they could have existed because they existed not only in ancient times, but also in relatively recent times. Only a few centuries ago, there were literal giants walking the earth. For example, some of the Frankish kings of Germany, they were literally giants, 7 or 8 feet tall and very, very athletic. The classical example of a giant. There was a Roman emperor, I forget his name offhand, I can find it, who actually was over 8 feet tall and enormously athletic and very giant-like in his characteristics. And this was all in recorded history. The Native American stories and legends speak of red-haired and blonde giants who invaded North America and conquered many of the Native American tribes until the Native American tribes finally ganged up on them and ended up destroying them because they had no choice, because these red-haired giants were also cannibals.
Right.
They not only attacked and defeated the Native Americans, or the Asiatic Native Americans, aggressively, they also ate them. So the Native Americans really had no choice but to destroy them. I have to say, reading their stories, I don't blame them. The giants were not very good people. In fact, they were extremely wicked. But that's my motivation has been to find out some of these ancient mysteries and kind of clarify, not only for others but also for myself.
Well, this is a very, very interesting topic, and I don't want to abandon it just yet. And I promise we will, give a lot of time to your recent book.
Sure.
But I know that in your research you covered all of the world and even all of America, and you give different accounts from historical accounts from like different county newspapers and miners' reports, different things like that of bodies being found, and even the Native American mythology, and you covered all of them. For the listening audience and for the members that may have not, if it's a new listener that's never heard of the giants, can you give a brief summary, of worldwide accounting, and then possibly of America, in the countings here, right where we are, and the associations with the different mounds and stuff?
Okay. I'll start at the very beginning and summarize the origin of the giants when you talk about the giants before and after the flood. Basically, the first mention of the giants, technically one could say that Cain was the first giant, and I suspect he was. He was because he was the offspring of, somehow mysteriously, the offspring of Satan, of the serpent. Now, some people try to promote the idea there was some physical union between the two, between Eve and the serpent, but I don't agree with that. I think what happened was that Satan probably took one of Eve's eggs, modified it, reimplanted it, and then it was fertilized by Adam. And then they had a person who was part human, part divine, as it were. That's why you have the line of Cain. He was modified, genetically modified human. I called that strain of human Homo artificialis, which is artificially manufactured mankind in my first article in the series, as opposed to Homo sapiens, which just means wise man. Homo artificialis means artificial man or manufactured man. And I actually did an entire taxonomy of the giants based on that Homo artificialis basis. For example, the Homo artificialis could be Nephi or Nephili or something like that. You have to read the article. I've forgotten. It's been actually about 6 or 7 years since I wrote it originally, so I'm a little hazy on it. But the basics are still the same. From that race of Cain, that modified human, came the line of Cain, which are all giants. And giant doesn't necessarily mean just tall, even though I believe they all were, or most of them at least, were larger than average human. They were also advanced in other ways. They're also highly intelligent, extremely charismatic, physically beautiful, and on top of it all, as you can imagine, they were enormously arrogant and highly aggressive and warlike. And as a result, as I go through my article, they systematically outproduced, outbred, and warred against the descendants of Seth until there were very few descendants of Seth left that were of pure lineage. This is described in Genesis 6, where the Nephilim came down in larger numbers, and began propagating with mankind, or actually modifying them genetically, probably in a laboratory-type environment, which is my belief. Like we have with the aliens now, today, which I believe are also the same situation. Right. But in the stories you hear about aliens abducting people and taking their eggs and seed and creating test tube babies, I believe that's basically the same thing again. But in the ancient times, I believe this is what happened. They came down and started modifying mankind to be enhanced in various ways, taller, stronger, smarter. And so they spread their seed this way and corrupted mankind. And as a result, though, mankind was taller, stronger, smarter, faster, and everything else, they were also highly destructive. So even though they were quote-unquote superior to others, as a matter of fact, I think they were actually inferior because they did not work well in the environment they were in. They had a tendency to overpopulate and over-consume everything in a certain area. They wouldn't replace what they had put in, or they didn't live in that environment well. They would strip the earth of all vegetation, useful vegetation, all the animals, everything, and then they'd move on to another place. And if when they ran out of food, they began to eat other humans. And that's when things really got bad. And so when God saw on the earth that all things were evil continually, the giants had spread everywhere. They had not only corrupted almost all of the seed, pure seed of the line of Seth, or killed them, or eaten them. They were now beginning to experiment with plant and animal life, creating genetically modified plants and animals. And as a result, there was nothing, very little of the original creation left that was genetically pure. And so God decided to take Noah and his sons and their wives. And Noah was said to be pure in his generations, which literally meant he was a pure descendant of Seth, untainted. And so was assumedly his wife. And he put them and a collection of other genetically untainted and unmodified animals, and probably plants, on the ark. And that was saved. And the rest of it, all the genetically modified people, plants, and animals, were all wiped out. And then so they got a fresh start in the world after the flood, where the untainted animals and humans were allowed to reproduce and recreate the world as it was meant to be without the giants. But then again, the Nephilim came down not only before the flood, but also afterwards, and began breeding with mankind again, this time focusing on the descendants of Japheth. Japheth being the son of one of the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Japheth actually represented the northern peoples. From him came the Caucasians. And the giants forever after were the Caucasian race. The Germans, for example, probably sprang from Japheth's first son, Gomer, which came known as the Gomerians, and later referred to it as the Cimmerians by the Greeks. And in time became the Gomerians, or Germans, or what we know as Germans. So the Germans are descendants of Gomer. And the Scythians came from Magog, which was the second son of Japheth. And they lived in Central Asia and became known as the Scythians. And their descendants include the Russians, the Irish, some of the Italians, and various other peoples. And both of these giant races invaded Canaan and became known as the giants of Canaan. They invaded that region. And to this day, you can see some of the remnants. Rujimhiri, which is known as the giant circle on the top of Mount Bashan in northern Israel, on the border of Syria and Israel. That is the giant circle up there, which looks very much like Stonehenge. In fact, it's basically exactly like Stonehenge. And there's also stone megaliths and mounds all over northern Israel in various places, which shows the fact that the giants had migrated south and had lived there for a time, because they were the famous mound people, also known as the Kurgans. Kurgan literally being, I think it's a Russian term, which literally means people of the mound. They were known for mound building megalithic structures, and various types of stone structures that you see not only in Central Asia and parts of Israel and Palestine, but also, of course, all over France and Ireland, obviously, which I discovered when I wrote my book called Mysterious World Ireland. I co-wrote that. I was a travel guide to Ireland. I found there was a great deal of information, a great deal of stone structures which are nearly identical to the ones found in Central Asia. And in studying the Irish annals, I found that their ancient ancestors came from Central Asia. So the Irish are descendants of giants as well as the Germans and really other peoples. But, that's getting off my train of thought. But basically, in the modern days is where things get interesting, because a lot of us, including myself, are descended from these peoples. And how do you determine who's giant and who isn't? It would appear that probably things are so evenly blended that everyone has a little bit of giant in them still, because the giants were known for being highly aggressive in that way, propagating. The Bible says they took as many wives as they wished. They had harems and things like that, so that their seed is spread far and wide. And most everyone on Earth has some some giant in them at some point, probably. So, but it's an interesting question, like we talked about earlier. It's a sensitive subject because it's a genetic subject. Who are we really? It can become difficult and controversial.
Well, that was truly fascinating, and that's an incredible explanation. I like the way that you break that down with artificialities and Homo artificialities, and the way that, that's really amazing the way you followed all the lines and the genealogies. Can you, and I'll get Alan to comment here right after this, but can you talk a little bit about how the giants ended up in America, and just talk about their association to the mounds, or what are in the mounds, as has been reported?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, that the giants were also known, at least some of the tribes were known as the Kurgans, that is, the people of the mounds. If you've ever seen the movie Highlander, the Kurgan, that is a classic example of a giant. There's a guy actually called the Kurgan in that movie, and I actually have a picture of him in one of the articles, The Giants of the Americas. And the Kurgans were known for their mound building, and they built mounds wherever they went, including the Americas. So the Kurgans and other related giant peoples, Vikings, Germanic types. And there was actually quite a few different subgroups. Even though the Germanic giants were considered to be the most powerful and fearsome of all the giants, that is, the German giants. Many of them, mostly Vikings, Irish, Germans, really the most aggressive types made it as far as North America, because only really aggressive people would take that kind of risk. And that's where you have the greatest, most powerful, most fearsome of the giants. Many of them are in the North American histories. And early explorers who came to America, particularly the people who first populated the Ohio Valley, found it literally covered, in some areas covered with thousands of mounds, burial mounds and other types of mounds. And most of them were plowed up for farmland, because the farmland was superb in this region, in the Midwest, in the eastern Midwest. But some of them actually found giant skeletons, some of them in copper armor. And these have since been spirited away by the Smithsonian, who, in their great zeal to propagate knowledge, did their best to hide as much of it as possible, particularly that which disagreed with the isolationist paradigm, which said that Native Americans, Asiatic Americans, even though I agree they were the first ones here, they think that they were the only ones who ever made it here, and the histories of the Native Americans themselves say that's not true, because they have descriptions of Caucasians, giant peoples and otherwise, in North America, living alongside them and warring with them or living in peace with them, depending, but they were definitely here. Caucasians have been in North America off and on, almost since the beginning of human history. But the mound people are almost certainly giants. And one of the giant tribes was called the Runanwetunka, I think it was called. And they were known to be, they were described as being kind of silly, because they had a silly form of warfare, because what they would do was even though they're physically stronger and taller than others, they could easily overwhelm them. In order to gain maximum advantage over their enemies, they would pretend to be their friends, gain their confidence, and then once they've relaxed and they have their back turned, then they would attack and kill them and probably eat them. Then once that started happening, the word went around that these giants were not only not reliable, they were actually extremely diabolical. They ended up being wiped out by wave after wave of Asiatic, regular Homo sapiens peoples. And so the giants of North America were gradually wiped out. And also, I don't know if you ever watched Ancient Aliens, that show. There was a bit on there with David Hatcher Childress. It talks about the famous Lovelock Cave incident in California, where the local Native Americans, for the same reason as the ones in central Ohio, decided to wipe out a group of red-haired giants who had been living in that region and committing various outrages, including cannibalism and related things. And so they ended up driving into a cave, now known as Lovelock Cave, setting a fire at the entrance so they couldn't escape, and smoked them out and killed them all with the smoke and lack of oxygen. And these giants were actually found some years later. David Hatcher Childress actually found a giant's skull, which was of that of a person between 7 and 8 feet tall. And so the giant stories of the Native Americans were true. We actually have found giants in the story. Giants are real.
I did actually see that episode, and it was really interesting to me that he was able to go back to an actual college and a storage shed somewhere or a storeroom somewhere, and they, for them to actually bring out and reveal to us a skull after it's, because this is such a taboo topic and so hush-hush, and they're extremely careful to eradicate any of this information that disagrees with Darwinism and that whole evolutionary thing that they've got perpetuated on the minds of people. But would you want to comment on that? And then, Alan, I'll get you to give a question.
Yeah, you make a very good point. There's so many, things in the way between us and the truth. There's not only the racism aspect, there's the political correctness, and then we're fighting against the scientific community, which has decided against all evidence to the contrary that evolution is a fact. There's no such thing as people visiting the Americas, before Columbus. And it's just lunacy. I'm on the verge of dismissing this academic community, the scientific community, as legitimate because they're not acting like scientists. They're acting like priests.
Right.
Propagating a religion of humanism. And it's just, if you're capable of ignoring the facts, then you should not be in that business at all. You have no business being called a scientist. We have to take all the data, not just the stuff that we like. And I'm capable, some of my beliefs in the Bible have changed based on scientific facts, not the core belief in Jesus and salvation, but in terms of creation and that sort of thing. Because, you can't argue with facts.
Right.
So we have to be factual. Us, particularly, since we're working in the fringe areas of science and speculation, we have to be particularly careful to stick to the facts.
I agree with you. Alan, do you have a question or comment here?
Yeah, I would just like to ask you as to the current presence of Nephilim hybrids on the Earth, not just a disseminated effect of the gene pool from history, but a possible intentionally generated Nephilim hybrid that may be walking the Earth today, and as well as what role you see the giants playing in prophecy or the future of the Earth.
Yeah, I think my theory is that with the advent of, really for about a better part of a century, the advent of the UFO phenomenon and things, I think the giants are on the Earth again. I believe the UFOs are the Nephilim. There's no doubt in my mind, and it's not just a theory. That the large amount of evidence and the speculative and people talking about their experiences, I don't think it all could be a hoax. And the fact that it fits in so perfectly with the Bible, the literal translation of the Bible, by the way, of these divine or semi-divine beings coming down from heaven to earth and mixing with mankind and creating genetically modified people. And the fact that it happens during critical periods in mankind's history, and Jesus himself said, as it was in the time of Noah, so it will be at the time of the coming of the Son of Man, then you're going to find the same things at the time of the coming of the Son of Man, assuming he's coming soon. I think he is. You're going to find the same things now as you did back in the time of the days of Noah. You had that happening in the days of Noah. Therefore, you're going to find it in these times as well. And since the UFO phenomenon fits that perfectly, therefore, if you're capable of hearing it, that must be the answer. So there's no doubt in my mind, based on my faith and my understanding about what apparently is happening with UFOs, that we probably have had a substantial amount of people, various groups, mostly Caucasian actually, being systematically modified so as to create a culture, a situation where the fallen angels can come down from heaven to earth and rule over those people, us essentially, I suppose, as well, everyone, in a way that is very easily managed, as opposed to, say, 100 years ago where such an event would cause chaos. Now we're practically expecting it to happen. Some people want it to happen. So they've been systematically not only modifying us genetically, others. I don't believe Christians can be modified. Born again Christians can be. I think they're protected. But others who have not have sold out to the devil or just given up on God or whatever, they have, like their fathers have fallen away, had become prey to these demons, and these demons have been able to modify them because they are no longer protected by God. And as a result, I think this systematically, this culture and, kind of licentious culture and, kind of anything goes thing is kind of a byproduct of this modified human who no longer seems to have a moral compass. So I think part of God, the morality, the lack of morality is due to this modification. Not only does it cause physical modifications, it also kind of twists their moral sense that God, I believe, put into us innately. That has been eliminated or twisted around so badly it's hardly there anymore. So, yeah, I would agree with your thesis that in these latter days that there are genetic modifications and they are linked to the UFO phenomenon.
Do you also see that as part of the Great Deception that has been warned about? And also as this phenomena being associated to the Antichrist and the release of Apollyon Abaddon?
That's a couple of interesting and good questions, and key questions we need as Christians to consider carefully. The first question, the Great Deception. The Great Deception probably has to do with the Antichrist appearing as God, as Christ. As it says that in the Bible, actually, so that's kind of a no-brainer. But I think it does have to do with the alien gospel and the "you should be as God" kind of approach, where he'll be like Jesus, but he'll say you don't have to follow one way. You can go your own way and do your own thing, do it your way. But I also think the major component of the deception will be a technological ability to advance human life far longer than it is now, and also to enhance the quality of life in a sinful way to those who take this mark. I've speculated on the mark and the related technology to much of the chagrin of some hosts I've talked to a bit about, but you guys seem to be pretty hip, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I'm thinking. I believe that the mark of the beast will probably be the typical computer chip most people talk about. But the real difficult part of the mark of the beast will be a nanotechnological network that will be placed inside the body, much like, or possibly exactly like Morgellons. And that network will hook up that chip so that it will actually allow centralized control of the human body. Those who take the mark, they could actually be controlled or at least heavily influenced by this central network, which would allow not only communication between the chip and, say, a satellite or other radio communication, but also allow people to be controlled to some extent. I think that's part of it. They get benefits from that, but they also lose basically their free will. And that's all, in my opinion, the end times deception has to do with basically the fallen angels, aliens, giving mankind what appears to be a free gift, but that free gift will end up being a way of enslaving them.
Yeah, that sounds like it sounds like we're all on the same page. Alan, any comment?
Cutting edge comment. I've heard that come to the forefront a few times in the last few months from different speakers on the subject. That was just well worded. And if anyone doesn't know what Morgellons is, you just want to Google Morgellons exposed. I believe this to be a large ramification of an off-world type of genetically modified robotic technology that will definitely affect the world in the near future, and it's just starting to break out right now. And I was wondering if you could comment on any superhuman capacities or capabilities of the Nephilim, since they're of a transdimensional or angelic genetic mixture.
The Nephilim, as in the fallen angels themselves, alien?
Well, they're progeny, the giants.
Giants.
Or even both.
Yeah, I could talk about that. When the angels fell, were probably thrown down from heaven, which maybe they're related to Planet X. We can talk about that later. When they were thrown down from heaven to earth, I think what they did was they created bodies for themselves by manipulating the pre-existent life forms that God had created, or possibly they themselves created some primitive life forms as a form of experimentation to try to be like God. Create their own creation that was rival to and against what God created and was going to create. And I believe that is a repeating pattern for them. But they basically created bodies for themselves which were highly long-lived, and so they could interact with creation. But these bodies were really designed for space. That's why you have the gray aliens, are highly durable bodies that can exist well in space and are highly long-lived and very flexible and durable. But they weren't well suited for Earth life. So they modified existing men to be able to do the things that they wanted them to do. And not only did they modify them genetically, I also believe that they enhanced them technologically in kind of a cyborg way. Like I mentioned, with the Morgellons and the chips and all that. One of my theories was, and I tend to get a little highly speculative with these things, so forgive me if I go a little overboard. In order to really control a people in a way that would be really efficient, you would have to literally wire them so that they no longer had free will or control over their own bodies. Now, you could actually do this. If you've ever seen a way that, for example, people who have their paralyzed legs, they can be made to walk in a kind of a herky-jerky way by applying electrical stimuli to their muscles through the skin. So people can actually walk that way. There was actually a Star Trek episode, Next Generation, where Worf lost use of his legs and he was able to walk in kind of a jerky way by electrical stimuli, some bands applied to his legs. That can actually be done right now. But a more efficient way to do that would be to have a network of nanofibers working right through your body, which went from a centralized chip processor unit right to the muscle and applied electrical stimuli directly to the muscles in a way that could be more efficient than, say, having an electrode on the outside of your skin stimulating the muscle that way. You could actually allow people to walk that way who couldn't walk. So that one of the promises of the chip and that technology was people who are paralyzed or whatever could walk again, literally, and this could be kind of a counterfeit miracle. Look, the Antichrist can make people walk again. See, this woman who could not walk can now because of the help of this technology. But something even more diabolical, and I considered this. I did an article on, I started a series of articles on the real Mount Sinai, which I believe is Serebet al-Qadim in southwestern Mount of Sinai Peninsula. I was studying the Amalekites and the concept of a disease called Zarat, which is talked about frequently in the Old Testament as one of the plagues of Egypt. And it was described as little red worms, which kind of wove themselves into your bodies, getting into your foot. And I speculated, thinking, now, what is the most radical? What are the possible implications of this? Is that if this, for example, an ancient form of Morgellons, which had been around maybe not since just a few decades, maybe since the beginning. One of the weapons of Satan uses to try to enslave mankind. Could it be that certain giant peoples were actually infested with this to the point where they no longer had control of their own bodies? Such a technology could be used to control someone by inventing the body and weaving the network of fibers throughout the body to the point where if they also have an embedded processing unit which could do the thinking, this, the information, the network of fibers could actually override the brain's stimulus to the muscles and cause this person to walk and act in ways different than they want to. So you could literally have a cyborg human being whose muscles are stimulated in various ways to walk or to swing a sword or whatever. So you could have a remote control warrior, basically. And when I'm speculating in this kind of way and thinking in terms of how in the end times could people not be able to kill themselves, as it says in the book of Revelation, death will flee from them. I thought, the only way they could do this is if they actually no longer had control of their own bodies. It's pretty radical stuff when you think about it, but this is technically feasible right now. I mean, with nanotechnology, we could do embedded chips and advances in science. This is feasible right now. We could do this. But if it were done in more of a diabolical way, you could enslave the human race in such a way. And I believe this is what Satan will do.
Doug, I did a show, I think maybe 4 or 5 months back, and I interviewed a soldier, a veteran, named Andre McCoy, and he was talking to me about the vaccines that he had received because he was forced to receive 2 series of vaccinations. But he swore to me, and he testified in this interview as to such, that what had happened since receiving those vaccinations is that he felt that there was some kind of nanotechnology that was replicating itself and creating a counterfeit body within himself, and that he said that the military was in fact doing research with this kind of thing right now, and that they were using our soldiers as guinea pigs for that sort of thing already.
I believe it. What I said about the nanotechnology and the remote control seems radical. It's actually very feasible and desirable from the point of view of a military person, because that way, persons so controlled could not run away in battle. They would be forced to do whatever they were told to do. So you basically have a cyborg human who is only partly human or mostly human and does not have the ability to make their own decisions anymore. They have to do whatever the computer tells them. And when you think about it, really the end game of this is, in the end, you're going to have 2 armies. You can have the armies of the beast and the armies of Jesus. And when you have this enormous army of Christ, which is far superior to the army of the beast, coming out of heaven, there's going to be a major morale problem. You can have a lot of these guys just running away in terror. The only way to keep that from happening is to make it so they can't run away in terror. They're no longer in control of their own bodies. From a military point of view, and I've studied military before in the past, morale is probably the number one most important thing, because we don't have a soldier who's willing to fight, none of the rest of them really make any difference. So in order to guarantee that they fight, and Satan, I don't think he's going to take any chances, probably introduce a technology that will make it so that they have to fight whether they want to or not. And the way I described earlier with the interior network of fibers with the embedded chip and possibly some other technology is a way back, because if they no longer have control of their own muscles, they're effectively enslaved by the computer.
Now, this will be my last comment on this, and then we'll actually go into your book and talk about the associations with the Nephilim and the fallen angels and the Hydra children and the Nibiru and Planet X and all that. But I just wanted to make a comment here about a movie called Jacob's Ladder, and the director brought this movie out as a way to make commentary on an experiment that happened back in Vietnam, where a group of soldiers was given a drug to enhance their performance in war. And so they were given this drug, and then they were dropped in the battle. But what had happened is, before they ever reached the enemy, they ended up killing themselves and tearing themselves up in war. And so that movie actually depicts kind of what we're alluding to as well. But can you can you talk about the associations with the fallen angels and their hybrid children, and like the Anunnaki and the Nibiru, and talk about your book and anything else like that?
Sure. My book on Planet X, Sign of the Son of Man, the End of the Age, I discuss mainly Planet X from the biblical, ancient, mythological, such as Sumer and Babylon, and also from the scientific point of view, because there's a very large amount of scientific evidence for the existence of Planet X. But regarding the Anunnaki, particularly, in Nume Elish, there's a description near the end of the story about how the Anunnaki came down and built a stage tower for the Babylonians. They actually came down and helped the Babylonians, gave them the plans on how to build the stage tower so that they can worship the gods in heaven. That is the false gods of the Babylonians. One of these was the deity called Marduk by the Babylonians, who was described as a star in heaven, a planet specifically. It was also referred to as the bow star because it had a very unique look about it. It was kind of shaped like a bow with what looked like wings. And it was also known as the bow star because its appearance presaged meteorites raining down on Earth, at least one of which caused the end of the Empire of Sumer, as described in the Lamentations over the destruction of Sumer at Ur. One of the Lamentation texts, I think it was translated by Samuel Noah Kramer sometime early in the previous century. And basically, Planet X appears to be the same object, the theoretical object, the same object that the Babylonians worship as Marduk, and the Sumerians, their predecessors. The Babylonians, when they conquered the remnants of the Empire of Sumer after the destruction from the meteorite that struck, they took on the old creation epic from the Sumerians and replaced the chief god of the pantheon, the creator god in the story, with which was Enlil in the Sumerian version, with Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. So there's belief that the creation story, also known as the Nume Elish, is actually a very ancient story, which basically stays the same except for the chief god in the story, the hero of the story, changes depending on who is currently ruling Mesopotamia. If it's, for example, the Assyrians, it became Ashur. When the Persians conquered Babylon, the hero of the story became Ahura Mazda. But before Marduk, the central character of the story was a deity named Enlil. And before that was a deity named Anu. My theory is that this is a branch tradition that came from the original root from which the Hebrew tradition also came. Just the Babylonians told it a different way than the Hebrews did. They used various deities in the places of the planets. And really to this day, the planets are still named after various deities, in this case Roman deities. Excuse me. But the tradition of the planets being named after various deities of Pantheon was originally handed down from the Sumerians to the Babylonians, and eventually to the Greeks when Alexander the Great conquered Babylon. He found that the Babylonian culture and religion was far superior to their own, and they adopted it basically whole cloth, including the concept of naming the planets after various deities. And that's where we get our concept of gods as planets. It had always been true in the ancient Near East. But Planet X was known by the ancients by the Sumerians as either Anu or Enlil, depending on what part of ancient Sumer you're talking about. Anu is the oldest of the Sumerian deities to fulfill that role as the creator of heaven and earth, followed by Enlil, later Marduk, the Babylonians. But basically, the Babylonians and the Sumerians also had a scientific name. There was a scientific name for the planet and also a deity name. And their scientific name was Nibiru, which means the planet that crosses, or the planet of the crossing. So called because it crossed over the orbits of the other god planets that they worshipped in their pantheon. It had an unusual orbit. And if you're going to take them seriously, the Enuma Elish, as a serious, true story about this astronomical enactment, it actually works very well to describe a planet that crossed into our solar system in a highly elongated elliptical orbit, crossing over the other orbits and coming into conflict with Earth. Now, the Anunnaki were believed to have come down from this planet, from heaven to Earth. Thus, the term "those who came down from heaven to Earth." And heaven, in this sense, appears to be Planet X. And I suspect it's also that way in the Bible, but I'm not certain. But I have a feeling that might be true. We can talk about that later. But the Anunnaki are the same as the Nephilim. The Nephilim are those who came down from heaven to Earth, apparently kicked out of heaven, and they found their own kingdoms on Earth, which were inferior in quality to those in heaven, but were also reminiscent of the heavenly kingdom of God. And that's where we get the concept of both the Anunnaki and the Nephilim. They're both considered to be inferior beings who were thrown down by the god or gods, depending on which culture you're talking about, from heaven to Earth, where they continue to rule over man behind the scenes.
Alan, do you got a comment or question here too?
I just think the show is going very well and is very interesting. I just wanted to quickly break down a movie called Necessary Evil with Danny Trojo from Machete. They uncover a Nephilim in a subterranean cavern, refer to it as a Nephilim from Genesis 6 in the Holy Scriptures by a rogue commando team, and they capture this Nephilim, which is in stasis, and it actually psychically levitates Danny Trojo about 7 feet in the air when it trips a type of proximity alarm, and they begin to actually intravenously inject the Nephilim's blood, and they end up they're levitating people, and they've start walking in a bunch of supernatural type of psychic and telekinetic powers, and they begin to actually intravenously inject this Nephilim's blood as well as synthesize pharmaceuticals from the blood, and they release it as a maternity drug by the name of Refisil. So that would be Lucifer backwards. And at the end, you see a baby crib glowing the color of this blood. And the final comment in the movie by the narrator, it says, "I was speaking to God just the other day, and he said that they will be as lemurs or foam jumping off cliffs, unable to die."
Unable to die, it's interesting. This is a TV show?
It's actually a movie called Necessary Evil with Danny Trojo of Machete.
I haven't heard of that. I'll try to check that out sometime. It's possible that has something like it. It's impossible for a flesh and blood creature to not be able to die, but the idea of not being able to kill themselves, like I mentioned before, if they're controlled somehow, is possible.
This reminds me of the passage in Joel chapter 2 where it talks about that army, the return of the locust army, and how they, even when they fall on the sword, they can't come to death.
Really? It could be that. See, if it bleeds, it can be killed. That's the bottom line. Anything can be destroyed. But it might be that since they're genetically enhanced and also possibly cybernetically enhanced, that their endurance and longevity and the ability to take injury is probably so greatly enhanced that it seems like they can take just about anything.
Mm-hmm.
They'd, of course, be much more tough, and, of course, the ability to for the electronic system to kick in adrenaline and other things and possibly other drugs into the system might make them last a lot longer and fight a lot harder than they would otherwise. But, of course, if their wound was great enough and they didn't seek medical attention in time, even the most powerful creature will eventually die. That said, like I said, they'd be so much tougher than regular humans, it might seem that they are actually invincible.
For those that are out there in the listening audience that have never studied this and really have no care to study of it, why can you tell us why your book is relevant for the people of this time and why it's important for them to come to know about these things?
The Planet X, the sign of the Son of Man, and the end of the age, is basically a story. It's kind of a backstory and forward story, because Planet X encompasses both the beginning and the ending of mankind's history, because I believe mankind's role in history will eventually come to an end. That it's important to understand, just like you begin at the beginning of a book,
right,
that you start at the beginning so you understand the situation, the parameters in which you are involved, the rules in which the game is being played. So Planet X, by understanding the planet and its role in humankind's history, and it has a central role and the highest role, you can then begin to piece together everything else in between, just like you might build a puzzle from the outside in. So when you understand the framework, it's much easier to build the rest of the puzzle, because you know where it begins and where it ends. So it is with Planet X, the sign of the Son of Man, the end of the age. You get these major events. You understand how Earth was created. It was created by Planet. It was recreated by Planet X. In my opinion, Genesis 1:1 actually talks about not the creation of Earth, but the recreation.
Right.
Really, Genesis 1 is all about not so much a history of the entire universe. It's really just a very basic summary of how Earth was created in its present form, as a prolegomena to the rest of the story, which is really about Israel and God's people and their salvation. Only the first 3 chapters out of 50 are about the creation. It's really not given much attention. So I don't think they really meant to talk too much about the creation. It was more of an afterthought. It's like the stage; they're setting the stage. This is the stage in which the history of Israel was played out. If you go to see a play, for example, you don't go to play to see the stage. You go to the play to see the actors. And that's why they de-emphasize the creation aspect so much in Genesis, because it wasn't important. And in the end, the heavens and earth will actually go away. Earth will cease to exist and be replaced by a new heavens and earth. So the play, the platform, or the stage we're on right now, at some time in the future will no longer exist and it will no longer matter. So I think the Bible purposely de-emphasizes Earth and the creation in that way for that reason. So people need to understand that. There's a tendency to talk about creation as if it was almost as important as the salvation experience itself, and it really is a very minor feature of the Bible, in my opinion. But you need to understand what happened so you understand the rest of the story.
Right. It's important to know where we are in order to know where we're going. Well, can you tell us also about what it was that led you into the research of this book, and kind of tell us about the evolution of your research and how it came to where it is now?
Well, my research originated in the late 1980s, really the mid-80s, when I was thinking maybe Jesus would come back to Earth in our lifetime. In fact, I was and am convinced of that. So I wanted to study for signs of his return. What would be the sign of his coming in the end of the age, as it says in Matthew 24:30. And I realized, I thought about it, Jesus was, his birth was foretold by a sign, the Star of Bethlehem. And would it be that the same star, or whatever it is, would return at his second coming? So armed with that assumption, I began looking for possible explanations for what this sign would be, whether one at his birth or at his second coming. Maybe they were both the same thing, same object, or same event. So I began studying various aspects of the Star of Bethlehem. Was it a comet? Was it a conjunction of planets? Some kind of supernatural apparition? And near the end of my search, I realized I was running out of ideas, and I came across this book called The 12th Planet. I was like, this is interesting. I never even considered this before. And it wasn't written by a Christian. He talked about the ancient Sumer and also talked about how this planet appeared in the Bible and all sorts of things. This was, of course, the famous 12th Planet book written by Zecharia Sitchin. So I realized, this is a possibility that there is another planet in our solar system might account for this heavenly sign, which I believe will mark both his first coming and his second coming. And in order for it to be the same sign, it would have to be a planet, because only a planet would return. Stars are more or less fixed. Comets are pretty frequent, so they're not really very special. Conjunctions of planets are also fairly frequent, and not really all that bright. The conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn really isn't that bright, And the last time it happened, it only lasted for a few days, and it wasn't really a lot special. But the appearance, as described in the Sumerian texts of Nibiru, of Marduk, was glorious. And it would have fit perfectly the description of the Star of Bethlehem, particularly since the Magi were the inheritors of what I call the ancient creation tradition. They're the ones who inherited the writings of the Babylonians when the Persians conquered the Babylonians. As you read in the book of Daniel, not only were the writings of the wise men of Babylon co-opted and actually literally physically taken from Babylon, the wise men themselves, including Daniel, were physically taken from Babylon to Persia to serve the Persian emperor. So they would have been fully aware of Marduk and Nibiru, and they would have understood this to be a planet that comes around every once in a while, marking great events in human history. So when the time came, and the fullness of time for Jesus to be born, the Magi immediately realized, both from their own writings and the writings of the Jewish exiles in Babylon at the time, and of course Daniel, who was the head of the wise men, probably heavily influential. They realized that the Messiah would probably be of a descendant of Judah, and born, or at the time, at the reappearance of the star, which was actually a planet X, which I believe. And when this planet appeared in heaven again, this was a time when God would actually physically appear on earth again. Because he actually, 2,000 years previously, he'd actually appeared on earth and physically appeared to Abraham. 1,000 years later, King David was born, a major milestone in Israel's history. In fact, Jesus himself was called the Son of David frequently. And then, of course, Jesus was born another 1,000 years later. And so I deduced from this sort of 1,000-year cycle that the statement in the book, in the New Testament, that the day of the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day, literally referred to the orbit of planet X being 1,000 years long. And this was corroborated by the scientific estimates of various astronomers who have been looking into the planet X phenomenon, that their estimates of the orbital period averaged around 1,000 years for planet X. So this fit perfectly, not only with the Bible, but also with mainstream astronomy. I realized then I really had something. And so I wrote the majority of the book. I started an independent study in my grad school, Wheaton College grad school, on the Magi and the Star of Bethlehem, and hypothesized it was planet X. And this formed the seed of a book I wrote. So the book I just published was actually mostly written by 1995. But I realized that the time wasn't yet ripe for it to be published. The market just wasn't there for it yet. But now with the whole Nibiru thing, and Marshall Masters promoting the idea and others, and it's gotten much more mainstream. And I believed now, in 2010, it was the right time to go, particularly since if we're going to have the beginning of the end times in 2012, which looks pretty likely. Now it's time to get the information out so it can be out and circulated in case the system fails and the publishing system goes down, which is possible.
Right.
So I wanted to get that information out in the circulation before that happened. And I also managed to get it out. I wanted to get it out, finished by October 10th, 2010, because it was 10-10-10. Because it's, 10th planet, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, and kind of weirdly, I realized a few weeks later that Dr. Sitchin apparently died the very weekend I finished my book.
Oh. Wow.
I was totally weirded out, and I was like,
how
odd. Because he dies on October 9, I finished on October 10.
Mm-hmm.
The great mind is gone now. It's picking up his mantle here. Do you hear that, people? Okay. So anyway, since I decided that now was the right time to do it, I've been holding back on the book for a long time. I did Mysterious World for a long time to try to improve my research and writing and look at some different topics like the giants and things, and try to let my writing style mature to the point where I could actually finish the book at a level of quality I thought was acceptable. And so the end version you see now, or will see now once it starts shipping, I don't know if you guys actually have a copy. I'll send you one if you don't. It's much better than it would have been. Much more mature writing and much more interesting.
Well, excellent. Yeah, we'll have to, we'll exchange. I'll send you a copy of my fourth one. I wanted to also ask you, because you said you had listened to show that we did on the Destroyer Comet. And so I wanted to get you to just comment on the show that we did and about the red dust and its possible relevance, and anything else that you thought was fascinating or of interest within that show.
I found the whole thing quite interesting. If that Colburn Bible is indeed accurate, and it sounds like it might be, that we have a very unique and valuable resource to help us understand exactly what Planet X is all about. Assuming that's Planet X and not just a large comet, which sounded to be like it was more like a planet-sized object or a very large comet. But along those lines, Planet X, I found in my research, is actually essentially, in appearance, a giant comet. Comets, most people don't understand this, but they're actually very dark in color. They're called black bodies, which means that they're actually literally darker than coal. Comets, for most of their orbit, have an albedo of less than or equal to 4%, which means only 4% of the light transmitted that hits them is transmitted back, so they're impossible to view with normal space optical telescopes until, of course, they come close enough to the Earth and the process of sublimation starts occurring, at which time the comet's tail forms, which basically sublimation is basically when the solar wind heats up deposits of water or carbon dioxide or other gases and solids on the surface of the comet, and it sublimates directly, goes right from solid to gaseous form, or very rapidly from solid to gaseous form. And sublimation is basically the melting of ice, so it goes right into vapor form immediately. And that vapor streams up behind the comet and forms the tail, which makes it visible. Otherwise, it's invisible. Planet X, I believe, is essentially the same thing, except on a planet-sized scale. It's impossible to see because it is blacker than coal, and only becomes visible when it comes close enough to the sun for its coma to form. This is why Jesus says, "Behold, I come like a thief in the night." He is coming in on his planet, which is basically a stealth planet, and it'll appear suddenly and gloriously near the end of the tribulation, at which time people on Earth, as it says in Matthew 24, will be terrified. All the tribes of the earth will mourn, because they realize, the Christianity thing was right all along. We're out of luck, and Jesus will return, of course, and take his own and wipe out all those who didn't agree with him, who sought to make war against him, which will be basically the armies of the Antichrist, which we discussed earlier. But the description, specifically of the red dust and the near flyby of Planet X, if it does do a near flyby, it should probably will in the end times. Probably this red dust is basically this black material that's covering it, which will, even though it looks black, it'll probably turn red as it comes closer to the sun. It says in the Sumerian texts that Nibiru will actually become blood red as it approaches, comes close to the Earth. I believe this is probably the pulverized remains of the animal and plant life that was on the primordial Earth before it was struck by one of Planet X's satellites. Now, what would happen in that scenario is everything on Earth's surface would be flash-fried, pulverized, and powdered and thrown up into space. And so basically you have this massive amount of organic and animal material that's been reduced to its constituent elements. Thrown into space, and it'll basically cover everything that it comes in contact with. So Planet X probably flew through this cloud and got covered with this stuff. So now it's a black body. It's covered with, it's literally a black planet, black in color. And this explains why the comets are also coal black as well. They also flew through this material, this cloud of material that was thrown up into space by what is called by the scientific community, the mainstream scientific community, as the giant impact. Because I'll diverge a little bit here. The scientists now have believed for a better part of 30 years, that the moon was created by a giant impact, by an impactor that struck Earth, that was roughly the size of Mars, that struck Earth, and embedded itself inside of Earth, where it remains today. And much of the mantle of Earth was jetted out into space, cooled and solidified, and went into orbit around Earth and became our moon. But a lot of the other material became what we know as the comets and the asteroid belt. And then, of course, Earth has moved to its current orbit from its original orbit in the asteroid belt per Sitchin's hypothesis, which I agree with. But the comets were actually part of the ejecta from this giant impact, which included a great deal of water, which explains why they have comet tails. But they are also coated with this black material, this organic material, which made them pure black. Now, and covered with basically, and people and scientists have studied comets and asteroids have found that they're literally covered with part of the black tar-like organic goo, which they don't know where it came from, and it's organic because it actually has amino acids in it. Now, that wouldn't have happened spontaneously in space. It had come from a planetary body which had life on it, at least primitive life on it. So there's proof right there of life in the universe originating on the primordial Earth. In fact, most recently, I think it was one of the comets, I forget what the name of it, they actually sent a probe out to it. They were thinking, this will give us an insight into the Oort cloud that I believe orbits outside of the solar system. When they got the samples back to Earth, they found that the comet actually originated from the inner solar system. In other words, Sitchin's hypothesis was right. The comets originated from Earth, the giant impact, and that's my theory as well. But to get back to your question regarding the red dust, if the destroyer is not actually Planet X, even if it isn't Planet X, if it's just a large comet, it's probably for the same reason. The red dust is probably this pulverized organic powder from the primordial Earth that was destroyed, raining back down on Earth through the atmosphere. And basically, this would, if it's red dust, it would take the form of red rain. This is why you have in the end times description of blood, fire, and pillars of smoke. It says literally blood will rain from heavens. And that's what the stuff is. It's pulverized remnants of ancient animal matter condensing into the atmosphere and forming red rain. Literally blood. It literally is raining blood. And this happened actually during the Exodus period as well, indicating possibly there was one or more comets active during that period as well, moving through the atmosphere and dumping their payloads over Egypt. It would also explain the rain of rocks and sort of thing, not only on Egypt but also during the conquest period of Israel and Joshua were conquering the giants. And many of the giant clans were destroyed by rocks falling from heaven, as described in the book of Joshua. But also, this will also happen when Planet X passes near, because Planet X is also go with the same organic material. So the description of this red dust falling off of the destroyer fits very well with that paradigm I'm promoting, that the comets and the asteroids and Planet X itself is coated with this stuff. And whenever they come close enough to dump it into Earth's atmosphere, you get these rainfalls of this toxic red rain, which kills off animal and plant life. And also regarding specifically wormwood, I talk about this in my book, Planet X, the Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age, that wormwood is actually a comet which passes through our atmosphere. And this particular comet had a particular high concentration of pulverized plant life that was super concentrated. And it contained toxic chemicals similar to or the same as absinthe or wormwood, which is used to make the drink absinthe, which has toxic and even psychedelic effects. So my theory is, and I read about this in the book, is when wormwood, this comet passes through the atmosphere, it dumps a lot of this toxic and psychedelic compounds into the water cycle, through the rain into the rivers, and the rivers into the drinking water. And then mankind literally has the world's worst drug trip, because every one of them is poisoned with this stuff, and they're having psychedelic trips of the worst kind imaginable. So these guys, many of whom are probably trying to escape the reality of the situation through drug use, where then, God is saying to them, you're going to try to escape reality through drug use, I'm going to give you the world's worst trip. And he injects this stuff into the water table, and everyone goes on the worst drug trip ever, and then God teaches them a very harsh lesson which they will never forget. And that's probably all has to do with basically the plant life and animal life, remnants of it from the primordial Earth that were thrown up into space by the giant impact, by the near flyby Planet X and striking of Earth with one of its satellites.
Do you think that dust could have been like the the remains that were compounded together after the Great Deluge, and when all the bodies gathered and deposited in all the low places?
Maybe, I don't know. Did it originate from space, or did it come from Earth in Colburn?
Well, no, the red dust did come from the Earth, but I meant as far as it impacting, when it impacted the Earth and some of this stuff was ejected up, if some of that organic material could have been from the Earth, like.
It could be. Who knows what's buried in the Earth and what could be dug up by a comet or meteoric impact. It could well be.
Oh, also, Doug, I wanted to make mention that one of our friends in the chat room had asked if you could maybe draw your mouth just a little bit away from the mic. They said that maybe some of it was reverberating and the sound was splitting, and so I just wanted to make sure that you were coming in as clear as possible.
Okay.
And also, Doug, we've got 40 minutes remaining, and I definitely want to continue on with, but I want to give you the opportunity to again bring out all of your book information, where to go to get it, your website information, and also your contact information should somebody want to speak with you if you're so willing.
Okay, the book we're talking about now is called Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age. It is available through a couple of different sources right now. You can go to Amazon.com, just go to the search box on Amazon.com and type in Planet X sign, that's Planet X, followed by the word SIGN. That'll take you right to it. Also, you can go to, Raiders News Network. I have a series of articles there that you can link to from the homepage at RaidersNewsNetwork.com. You can also go directly to, They have the Survival Mall, SurvivorMall.com. You can get it from there. Just type in Planet X in the search box there. And you can also order through your local bookstore. Just ask for Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age. It should be available through Barnes & Noble as well. As far as the websites, the major websites include planetx.info. That's planet-x.info. Right now, I just have a basic page up there now with book information, but we're going to have a complete website up there like Mysterious World. You can go to Mysterious, look at the Giants articles. That is mysteriousworld.com. If you want to contact me directly with various questions, you can send me an email to publisher@mysteriousworld.com.
Excellent. Alan, I wanted to give you a chance to make question or comment here as well.
The day of the Lord, in sync with a DMT trip. How horrific is that? So what's being spoken of here, friends, is a compound called DMT, which is dimethyltryptamine. It's the most psychoactive component known to man. It's renowned for tearing wide open the spirit realm, and it has to be smoked. It can't be just orally ingested. So if the sky was burning, I mean, it is a possible variable to the Word of God. And DMT is extracted from the wormwood plant. And also interesting theory on the millennial orbit. And in Genesis 15, a great darkness fell upon Abraham, and speaking about the enslavement of the Exodus in the fourth generation, the Amorites, and they had a vision of a smoking furnace and a flaming torch. If you wanted to comment on that, or if you wanted to just speak to the seals, the bowls, and the vials, and possible inbound and outbound trajectory of Planet X affecting the globe.
Okay, great. Those are actually closely related, believe it or not. The description of Abraham and the covenant with God, it's important to note that the covenant was based on splitting an animal in two and passing a smoking pot or some kind of object between them two, the fiery object. That is, of course, pretty much identical to what actually happened in the beginning when God used Planet X to create heaven and earth. He passed fire in between. He used fire or a satellite to split Earth into two pieces, and this was the animal, the dragon in this case. So this is a recreation of the ancient creation, in symbolic format. If you will follow me and do as I tell you to do, and this, then I will bless you. And the seal of the covenant, they kind of reproduced in a minor way the ancient creation event where the dragon or the creature or the beast was split into two, and the smoking pot placed and run in between them. So this is kind of a symbolic recreation of the original creation act, or recreation of the earth in its present form. Now, here's your other question, and that is originally, I believe the original creation was originally where the stone was cut into two pieces, that the earth was cut into two pieces. That is the very first covenantal act between God and man. And if you look at the concept of covenant, the concept of covenant is about cutting a covenant. Literally, the word is always used as a covenant which is cut. And for example, you have the splitting of the animal into two pieces with Abraham. With the Israelites in Exodus, you had a dividing of the stone into two pieces, two tablets. And you have, of course, the dividing of the earth into two pieces by the satellite of Planet X. And in the end times, you have the return of the Planet X to finalize the covenant, which was made in the beginning. So you have the beginning covenant and the ending covenant, and there are what are called I forget the term, but the covenants are always parallel. You have a beginning and end part for each covenant in the Bible. There are entire studies done on this sort of thing. But there was a covenantal act between Abraham and God that was reminiscent of the creation. Now, when you have regarding the end times, I talked at length about this in the final chapter of the book, obviously. Titled after the title of the book, Planet X, Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age, talking about how this Planet X information about the creation, the Star of Bethlehem, the book of Job also, and finally the end of the age when Planet X returns and fulfills the covenant by saving Israel and destroying their enemies, which God had promised in the beginning. And what will happen is, right now, it would appear, if Sitchin was correct, that Planet X actually only comes as close to the Earth as the asteroid belt, which is close enough, which is where the Earth originally rotated before it was shattered and moved to its present position. And I get into why God did that in the book, in order to basically move Earth to a position closer to the Sun, where it would be adequately warm for life to exist as we understand it. Because if Earth orbited where the asteroid belt is now, it would be too cold. And there's also a number of other reasons. But it would appear that the asteroid, it probably only comes as close as the asteroid belt. But I believe in the end times, it will probably pass near to either Jupiter or Saturn or one of the outer planets, close enough so that its orbit has changed sufficiently so it will pass very near to Earth. And as a result, not only will Planet X come close to Earth, but also all the asteroidal and comet material that precedes it and follows it in its orbital path will also be aimed at Earth much more closely. So you have a much more intense bombardment of Earth with these asteroids than you did in the past whenever Planet X came by. Whenever Planet X comes by, you always have some kind of activity because it's a huge body passing through the solar system, which is throwing asteroids and comets every which way, and you're guaranteed to get something hitting the Earth. But at this time, it'll be much more intense because Planet X and all the material in its orbit will be directed more directly at Earth. So you have this at this end times what appears to be, mainly in the trumpets and the bulls, wave after wave of comets and asteroids smashing into the Earth and just wiping out everything, just about everything, and systematically wearing down and destroying the empire of the beast, which had been built up over time and has now come to full rotten flower in the end times. And it's in the process of being built as we speak, actually. But from my understanding and my analysis of the trumpets and particularly the bulls, you have essentially wave after wave of asteroids and comets either striking Earth or something coming so close to it that they're causing major chaos. And this is what we have. And at the peak of the trumpets, the last trumpet, that is when Planet X If it hasn't appeared already, it'll appear then. And that's what it flies near Earth. And you have the bowls, which were super intense version of the previous trumpets. But this time, nobody escapes and nothing is left. In the trumpets, you had 1/3 of the trees burnt, one third of this, 1/3 of that, which probably mirrors the 1/3 of the fallen angels that were cast down. The concept of a third. A third is being judged. A third of the fallen angels and their works is being destroyed, and so forth. Probably what's being targeted is the genetically modified plants and animals that the fallen angels and their technology have created. And that's to make sure that they're gone. Just to say, okay, we're going to destroy this stuff. You guys have to surrender now, otherwise we're going to finish you off. And of course they won't give up. So the final series of bowls come in and just finish out what was left. And the Empire of the Beast is totally wiped out. And when the Planet X comes by, that's when probably Jesus will appear, whether or not he's riding on Planet X or he's simply using it as a tool to punish the Earth, like a scepter or a mace. There's reason to believe that Planet X is considered to be the scepter or mace of God, as described in Revelation 1. Jesus says, "Behold, I am the bright and morning star, and I will smash Earth like a pot, as I was given with a rod of iron, just as I was given my Father." I believe he's referring to Planet X when he refers to the morning star, and himself as the morning star, and him using Planet X like a rod of iron to shatter Earth. That I believe is, and it's actually reminiscent of an ancient Sumerian tale, the myths and exploits of Ninurta, where Ninurta actually uses a mace called the Shar-Ur to smash Earth and create heaven and earth from it. I believe this is an ancient understanding of this, or an ancient prophecy of the time when God himself will use Planet X to smash Earth and recreate it in a fashion that he finds usable. But that's off topic. I talk about it in the book. But basically in the end times, God will use Planet X as the primary means of judging Earth. And it will not actually strike Earth, but it will come so close that everything that is built up, everything that is not natural, everything that is like skyscrapers and large buildings and things that are not part of God's plan will also basically all be wiped out.
In the ancient story of Tiamat and the dragon and the creation story, it talks about one of the moons of this planet smashing into Tiamat, and then it also talks about the moon being captured, and that the moon that we have now is not one of our own satellites. Can you speak on that a little?
In Enuma Elish, it describes how Tiamat, preparing for the battle with Marduk, gave forth to 12 monster serpents. And the 12th of this was named Kingu, who was much greater than the rest of them. And they all came forth from her body. They were all born. Now, after the battle, when Marduk approached this planet, which the Sumerians say is a planet, they actually say that. When it came close to Earth, all of the 11 monster serpents were scattered. Their bodies, which were filled with water, were set in various directions. And Sitchin correctly, I believe, translated this as being the comets. So that's exactly what the comets are. But the 12th and greatest of them, Kingu, he retained in its original position, and he slew Kingu and created man from his blood. Now, and I believe what they were trying to communicate from this was that the idea that some of the material that went into orbit around Earth as a result of the giant impact fell back to Earth and formed a huge continent, which we know is the theoretical continent of Pangaea, the one great continent from which all other continents formed. This, I believe, is what they're talking about. Some of the material that went into space fell back to Earth and formed the first continent. That's the blood, quote unquote, of man. This was the material that God used to create Adam. This Earth that fell from heaven. So that's what I think. I don't think it came from somewhere else. That based on these Sumerian hypothesis forwarded by Sitchin and corroborated by mainstream science who have proven that the moon actually came from Earth's mantle. I believe that is what happened. The giant did that, carved it out along with a bunch of other lesser material, including the comets. And so it fell back to Earth and formed the first continents.
Okay. All right. Alan, did you have a question or comment here that you'd like to bring forth?
Just a few questions. I wonder if you could comment on the Nemesis theory and whether or not this possible binary sun may have a gravitational effect and may as well also be inbound. And also, you mentioned Tom Horn before. Him and Steve Quayle both brought forth conjecture, and I believe it to be prophecy, and I think they do as well, that the Nephilim will return in the end days and tied in with the Locust Army. If you just would care to comment on those topics, please.
The first topic again was which one?
Nemesis, the binary sun theory.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. It's basically a brown dwarf star, which is believed to be a binary companion. There's no evidence for it, but it's an interesting idea. I haven't studied it much, so I couldn't tell you, but it's possible, but probably unlikely. Regarding the Locust Army, I believe that will actually be, my theory is, and they actually, believe it or not, they have these things right now. I've recently read an article linked to from Tom's homepage, theGreatestNewsNetwork.com, about the Israelis, and probably us as well, have developed a kind of a small wasp-like mechanical creature which can be used to attack people. Now, probably what this will be in the end times will be enormous amounts of these things released to inject those who are taking the mark with something. Whether that's some sort of psychoactive drug or possibly the Margellans-like thing we discussed where it'll be introduced via some sort of sting and then it'll propagate inside of the body that way. It's not known, but I suspect it's the latter. And in either case, the technology exists right now to do that very thing. And I thought it was interesting if you look in, I think it's Exodus, maybe Joshua. And in either case, right before, I think it was Joshua, right before they invade the land of Canaan, there is an angel who stops, I think it was Michael or Gabriel, who stops Joshua and tells them that to wait because they're releasing the wasp ahead of them. And these wasps would, or wasp-like things, it's not really clear what it is, would clear out the land of Canaan and drive out the giants from before them. Now, my theory is it's possible that it's actually some sort of mechanical contrivance carrying some sort of biological, chemical, or possibly nanotechnological payload that was used to clear them out ahead of the Israelites, whether or not it was released by the angels or by the fallen angels or the other giants living in the land at that time is unknown, but I believe that it probably has to do with a literal insect-like nanobot which releases nanotechnology into everyone who takes the mark of the beast and use that nanotechnology as then used to enslave them.
So do you see the return of the Nephilim then being both like, as you stated earlier, the sort of fallen angel and cyborg, robotic, both as high technology also being used, as well as this fallen angel presence returning? And also, do you see a return of the giants themselves in capacity?
I think that the major quote-unquote magic or supernatural ability or what you have from the fallen angels is really that what we would call technology. It is the false and lying signs and wonders, fake miracles wrought by technology. And as early as the Book of Enoch, and really it alluded to in Genesis, the descendants of Cain were given gifts of technology by the fallen angels. The early descendants of Cain were particularly adept, as described, I think it's Genesis 4, as being adept at music and metallurgy. Those are their two primary things, and those are both forms of technology. The Book of Enoch gets into it a lot better. I'm not sure. Enoch is not canonical, but I think it's still useful. But it gets into much more depth that the fallen angels gave mankind all of the arts and sciences we understand of today, including technology. Azazel himself gave man the greatest of the fallen angels, apparently, who was mentioned in the Bible as a scapegoat to the high ceremony of, I think it's the New Year, Yom Kippur, I believe. He is mentioned in the Book of Enoch as giving mankind the secrets of the earth and the ability to work metals, to create swords and shields and other things. So really the gifts of the Nephilim or the fallen angels, call them what you will, it's always been technology. There's nothing new under the sun here. This is just another version of the same thing that's been happening on a cyclical basis throughout history. Whether we call it nanotechnology or advanced weaponry or stealth technology, it's all the same thing. Azazel's two main technologies he gave mankind were the working of metals and the ability to for cosmetics and that type of thing, which could also be translated as camouflage. So Azazel's, one of his gifts was probably stealth technology, as well as working the metals. So then, of course, they're aligned because stealth technology depends on special alloys to reflect and absorb radar in various ways. So, whenever you see high technology appearing in any culture at any time, you can be assured that it's the working of fallen angels.
Well, can you tell us in the last 20 minutes kind of what it is that you're covering over the various chapters in your book, and maybe guide us in like a little bit of an outline so that the listening audience can get a little insight into the contents of your work?
Sure. The book is mainly focused on Planet X. There is a mention in Chapter 2 of the Anunnaki that is more related to their mention in the Babylonian creation epic. It's more of an academic approach to the Planet X concept, which I started writing back in grad school and revisited recently and finished it up so they could publish it before things get weird. It's divided into 7 chapters, which are reminiscent of the 7 tablets of Enumerations, kind of a homage to the ancient creation epic, even though it's mainly biblical in orientation. I also wanted to give proper respect to the Babylonians, who did a superb job of keeping this information in a very unique and effective format for transmitting the knowledge of Planet X. They did quite a good job. And also, in my opinion, it's impossible to decode many of the references to Planet X in the Bible without understanding Enumerations. That's been the academic community, the mainstream biblical academic community, has written at length about the similarities between the two, even though they say that the Israelites' version was derived from the Babylonian. In my opinion, it was actually from a root tradition of which Babylonian was another branch. And I discussed that in Chapter 1, which I call God's Conflict with the Dragon in the Sea, which is a homage to a book of the same title written by a man, I think his name is John Day, about the description. The majority of the creation references in the Bible are not in the book of Genesis. They're actually in the Psalms and Isaiah and the book of Job. And in many of these descriptions, the creation is described as being the result of a conflict between God and the dragon, variously termed called Rahab or Leviathan, or simply a dragon, which is the Hebrew word Tanin. And in this description, as said, as a result or right after the defeat of the dragon, God created heaven and earth. And of course, by itself, this seems interesting. Maybe it's just a mythological allusion to Canaanite mythology. But if you read Enumerations, in some cases when I go back to the Hebrew, it's almost literally the same terminology. It's a description of God dividing the dragon into heaven and earth, twisting its tail into the rakia, which is the Hebrew word for firmament. And in English, the word rakis, which is a cognate to rakia, the Hebrew, means exactly the same thing. And it gives more detail. The rakis is actually literally a hammer of heaven, and it is described Marduk, for this planet, twisted Tiamat's tail into a circle in heaven, which is literally called a great band in heaven, or the Derma in the Akkadian. So what they have in both the Bible and in the Enuma Elish, parallel texts, it's a description of a creation of what could only be the asteroid belt. And so I get into that later in the book, but that's just basically, I allude to it in chapter 1, how basically Enuma Elish, the Bible has all this information about the creation being done as a result of conflict between God and the dragon. And also, not only does God defeat the dragon in the beginning, in Isaiah 27:1 it says that God will defeat the dragon Leviathan in the end times. And this is where you derive the concept of the dragon being defeated in the book of Revelation. The dragon is revived in the end times because Isaiah had prophesied that very thing would happen again. And the dragon is, of course, a description of the power of evil in the earth, rather than literal red dragon like you would find in The Hobbit or something like that. Though I find the idea that The Hobbit will be republished or remade as a film again, probably in 2012, more than a little interesting because it features a red dragon. But that's another story. So basically that's the thesis behind God's conflict with the dragon of the sea, that first chapter, is to show the reader, who's assumed to be Christian, because this is really a Christian book, though I think anyone would benefit from it who's interested in the subject of Planet X, that the creation idea in the Old Testament is actually primarily has to do with some sort of divine conflict between God and the dragon, this symbolic conflict, which resulted in the creation of heavens and earth. Now that said, we'll go into chapter 2 and talk about how, which is titled The Astronomical Religions of the Ancient Near East, and talk about how in the ancient world, all the non-Hebrew religions worship the gods, worship the planets as gods. They worship various natural forces, the wind, the rain, the sea, and so forth, as deities. But ultimately, all the greatest gods found their home as the planets. All the planets are worshipped as gods, particularly by the Sumerians and Babylonians and later peoples who derived their work and their beliefs from them, such as the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans, all of which you might note are part of the major empires which were made up the great man in Daniel's dream, the four empires. Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome are the four great empires of Daniel's dream, and of which the beasts were created. But in the ancient times, the ancients, particularly the most powerful of the ancients, the most technologically advanced, like the Sumerians and Babylonians, were obsessed with astronomy and some extent astrology, and worshiping the planets as the gods. And the greatest of those gods were the god of both the Sumerians and Babylonians and later peoples was this mysterious planet known as Anu and Enlil by the Sumerians, Marduk by the Babylonians, Ahura Mazda by the Persians. And there's this planet which would appear occasionally in heaven, at which time great events would happen on Earth. And they celebrated the most recent event. The Enuma Elish was actually written, I believe, as a celebration of the most recent appearance around 2000 BC. The Enuma Elish, the version we have now, is a copy of a copy of a copy of a version that was actually written around 1900 BC, not too long after Planet X appeared around 2000 BC, in my opinion. So I believe that it was written as a result, or as a commemoration of that incredible event. And as a result, when the star appeared again around 0 BC, the Magi knew exactly what it was, and they knew the King of Heaven had been born into flesh, and as Jesus, God had become flesh. It just had been prophesied by the Hebrews. So I get into that, and the fact that the ancients worked the planets as gods, and the Most High God was this mysterious planet which fits the characteristics of what we talk about in chapter 3 as Planet X. And so it's the tradition from the Magi in chapter 2 to the Magi following the Star of Bethlehem in chapter 3, which I believe to be Planet X. My theory first. I first talk about Planet X as the Star of Bethlehem in chapter 3, and talk about how, like I said, the Magi were the inheritors of this ancient creation tradition of a planet that moved around in heaven and appeared on various occasions of great importance when God himself would visit Earth. This is why they know God himself had been born in the flesh, and why they went to visit the King of Kings and brought their gifts at the time they did, in the place they did in Jerusalem. And I go into that. From that, I go into more of a scientific explanation of Planet X, why it would exist, and how it would fit into the biblical paradigm throughout the chapter 3. So if you're more of a scientific bent, chapter 3 might be more of interest to you, because this talks about the mainstream astronomical evidence and theories of Planet X. And then from that point, I go into chapter 4, which is the Sitchin-esque interpretation based on Enuma Elish. Now it corroborates with the technical evidence from mainstream astronomers. And I quote Sitchin a few times. I felt that it would be inappropriate not to quote him, because otherwise it would be plagiarism and it would be disrespectful. Even though some people apparently don't like Sitchin, and the Christian community particularly, I thought it was appropriate to mention him somewhere. So if you're offended by that, please forgive me, or you and your listeners.
Well, myself, I like to read everything, and I owe him a lot as far as what I've learned of, with the Anunnaki and the Sumerian teachings and all that too. And myself, I want to study whatever it is out there, get as many pieces of puzzle together so that I can put a bigger, picture together, get a clearer picture. And so, and the listening audience, they respect that here, because we read from a lot of the extra biblical books and the Apocrypha, and I even read from the Colburn Bible and the Sumerian teachings, and I'm not saying that all of these books are inspired in any way at all. I'm just, in fact, reading what they say so that the listening audience can just get a feel and make a determination for themselves afterwards, whether, they're interested in researching those things or not.
Yeah, you have the right approach. That is a form of interpretation known as grammatical historical criticism, where you read not only the text of the Bible, but also related stories in the context it was written, so you'll understand fully the mindset of the writers. When I mentioned the God versus Dragon combat, that was the ubiquitous creation paradigm throughout the ancient Near East. So when the writers wrote in that context and used that metaphor, they fit right into the context of the time. So you're right on track. You are actually a true academic, because you are actually looking at the secondary sources. This is what the real good academics do. They look at Babylonian sources. They look at the Canaanite poems. They look at the Egyptian mythology. Does this make sense in context? And this has allowed us to corroborate, a lot of conservatives, to corroborate a lot of the biblical material as being right in the right time, because it makes sense in the context it was written. So we've been able to prove that the Bible is indeed an ancient document that was written at the time, or at least committed to oral tradition at the time it was committed. So I think you're right on track there. But there's been some mixed reviews based on the whole 2012 and Planet X. Some people are sensitive to it, but I know your audience is pretty hip, so just wanted to drop that out there just in case there was a problem. So basically, I go through the Sitchin-esque paradigm in chapter 4, give him props in his work, and go through that and how it relates to Planet X theory, and give a kind of a concise summary of Sitchin's beliefs plus some of my own insights. Chapter 5 then gets into the biblical material. Once you've gone through the concept of the creation being a God versus dragon combat. In chapter 2, you've got the gods being, the planets being worshipped as gods, and you have chapter 3, we have the scientific approach to Planet X. In chapter 4, you have the ancient Near Eastern, particularly Sumerian and Babylonian interpretation, the astronomical interpretation. I then get into chapter 5 and do the reinterpretation of certain biblical passages based on the Planet X theory. And that this is where the typical Christian listener will probably derive the most benefit, because if you're interested in this theory, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where I begin reinterpreting some of the creation passages, not whole cloth, but getting deeper into the details of what's really being said here. In various portions of the Bible, for example, Isaiah, I believe it's 30, one of the Isaiah chapters, talks about how God sits on the circle of the earth, and the men thereof is like grasshoppers. The Hebrew says is God travels in a circle, or the earth, God himself travels in a circle in heaven. So that led us to an interesting speculation of what's going on here. So it's a reference to Planet X. And there's also references to heaven being like a place where rocks are stored. I think it's Isaiah, possibly Job, talks about heaven being like the munitions of rocks, a place where rocks are stored. It's a very good description of the asteroid belt, and which may be the second heaven of the three heavens. And I talked about the three different heavens. The first heaven probably is Earth's atmosphere. The second heaven probably the asteroid belt where the Planet X passes through, and it's part of its orbit. And the third heaven is the actual heaven where God lives, somewhere up in space or possibly a higher dimension. But I get into that, and based on the Planet X hypothesis and the Planet X paradigm, and retranslate many of these creation passages scattered throughout the Bible, which otherwise were a little odd, particularly the stuff in Job. So sometimes just didn't make a whole lot of sense. But when you retranslate it in the concept of the Planet X theory, they make a lot of sense. So that's what Chapter 5 is all about. And, of course, in Chapter 6, I found that when I was doing my research into the creation material in the Bible, that by far the majority of the creation material is actually to be found in the book of Job. So much material that I had decided that Job was actually not just wisdom literature, it's actually the Hebrew equivalent of the Babylonian creation epic. It is actually the Hebrew creation epic. And so I titled that chapter, Job, the Hebrew creation epic. It is a description based on the destruction of Sumer by a near flyby of Planet X around 2000 BC. This was used as an occasion to remember the ancient creation of God. The first time Planet X created Earth, by dividing it in half and moving into a new position and creating the moon and so forth. The book of Job was used as kind of a commemorative remembrance of the creation, using the life of Job being destroyed by the meteorite that fell on Sumer and destroyed Sumer and their surrounding areas, and of course Job's flocks, which were literally destroyed by fire, just like the Sumerians were. And some of them were taken by bandits, of course, but many of them were actually destroyed by fire from heaven, as described in the book of Job itself.
We've got 3 minutes remaining, Doug, just so you know, so you can get out the last chapter.
Thank you. So the book of Job, the 6th chapter talked about the book of Job as basically a remembrance of the ancient creation material that had been in oral circulation that was all put into one large book. And then the final chapter, of course, brings it all together. Planet X, the sign of the Son of Man at the end of the age. How this planet, which comes around in various key points in Israel's history, will return once more in the end times to finish off the armies of the beast and save God's chosen people from certain destruction.
Is it your determination that we are the fig tree generation?
I think we're living in the end times. We're probably the end times generation.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. Well, Doug, I want to thank you for taking the time to expound upon all those things that you did. This was a very interesting and very detailed show. Your knowledge of the giants is unsurpassed, and I know Alan and I both appreciate you. We've got 1 minute remaining. I just want to thank all the listening audience for coming in and listening to our show and following us and supporting us. We thank all of you out there for all the people that came into the chat room and comment points. Voice in the Wilderness, Rocket Man, Mama B, Math, Bo77, D. Pittman, all the guests, Kendra, all the people that have come in and out. We appreciate all of you, and we'll see you next week. And Doug, we'll definitely have to invite you on again if you're willing.
Anytime you want, I'm glad to go. You guys are great.
Great. Well, I appreciate you. And Alan, we'll talk next week. God bless everyone.
God bless.
what exactly would you say if your child looked up at you and asked you about God and if He exists and if He's true, and wondered what would happen when someone dies? Is there a heaven? And what about that man up on the cross? Am I forgiven? How exactly would you answer those hopeful little eyes when you're college educated and convinced it's all a lie? Sure, you went to Sunday school when you were young, but that was then. You're above those simple thoughts now. The only God you know is man. Are you saddened and ashamed to tell this little soul that you don't believe in anything and have no reason and no hope? There's no heaven and no meaning. There's no purpose to our lives. Did you believe we're just evolved, random mutations come alive? You know better than an insect, son, and when you die, that's it. I've learned through education that good and bad just don't exist. It's all just evolution. It's survival of the fittest. And we can get you a prescription when your life becomes depressed. I'm sorry that I've crumbled all your hopes and all your dreams, but it's time you realize that life's not what it seems. Are you lost? Are you alone? Are you convinced that life does not make sense? Have you forgotten that God even exists? Have you replaced all that was real for a life of cannabis and created your own truth? A happy atheist? Are you lost? Are you alone? Are you convinced that life does not make sense? Have you forgotten that God even exists? Have you replaced all that was real for a life of cannabis and created your own truth? A happy atheist? You realize your answers could just shatter all these dreams and everything that ever mattered to this precious little being who had belief in certain peace and received that inner voice inside his conscience, and his conscious mind believed. And it sickens you to think, cause you've been driven by your ego and your greed, and he sees that you don't practice what you preach. You've lost your dignity and you've succeeded in destroying all beliefs and defeated all his real hopes and dreams. They might never be retrieved, and the flame within his heart almost completely is extinguished, and the holes within his soul are filled with mimics, and the message of God's grace within his mind has been diminished, because the answers that you gave him took a piece of his existence, and the power of your words were unforeseen, and in that very moment you destroyed the very purpose of his being. And now he's lost and alone, and he's convinced that life does not make sense, and he's forgotten that God even exists. He's replaced all that was real for a life of counterfeit and created his own